Is your microphone muted? Yes, we cannot hear you. So if you're a panelist, we cannot hear you. So don't worry about any background noise. And I'm just going to stop sharing one more time. We are recording. Beautiful. Okay, so we will get going in 2 minutes. Well, that was a bit more complicated than it needed to be with the video, but that's okay. Oh, wonderful. There's a lot of people just coming on right now, so that's perfect. Hi, everybody. Welcome. We cannot see or hear you if you're just coming in. I know that's a big question a lot of people have, so you don't need to worry. We're going to be waiting 1 more minute and then we can get going.
We're getting a lot of room noise. So we just have to be careful there.
Okay. Let me just make sure too, there's no one. That noise would probably be coming from one of us. Okay, so are you guys good to go? We're good to start?
I am, yep.
Perfect. Oh, a few more people are joining in. Welcome to you. Okay, so we're gonna get started. Thank you guys so much for coming. I know it's bedtime for a lot of little ones. We appreciate taking your evening to spend with us. And so let's get started. So I already said my welcome, but welcome to everybody who is here. We know that we have both parents and professionals who are attending, which is fantastic. The purpose of this webinar is really to be very interactive, allow everyone to participate. I know you can only see and hear us, but there is an option for you guys to participate as well. I've said this a few times, but I'm going to say it again for the newcomers in. We cannot see or hear you, so you don't need to be worried about if there's any background noise on your end. The purpose of this webinar is really just to share some insights, give supports, our knowledge, personal stories, and really continue this dialogue of openness and everything that it entails, both the benefits as well as the complexities with it. So some of the more housekeeping parts of webinars and using this Zoom technology, I do know that it's new for a lot of people. As you can tell, we're still trying to deal with some of the kinks as well. How do you ask a question? So on the bottom of your screen, you're going to see that there is a chat option. So if you do have a question or if you want to contribute with what we're saying, add a comment, please feel free to click on that chat button and a little screen will pop up. Within that chat option, you do have an option of asking anonymously. So if you are uncomfortable, if you prefer to be anonymous, that is absolutely an option, or you can leave your name on there. You're also able to ask a question specifically to one of us. So just for the purpose of this webinar and trying to keep a bit of consistency, I'm sort of doing the maintaining of the questions and the chats. So for this webinar, if you don't mind sending me the questions, if you prefer to just send it to one person, I will make sure that it's read out loud. Again, I will not disclose your name. It's just so that we, everyone else can hear the question and we can get the amazing answers that we have. Same thing with the discussion. So as we're speaking, if you feel that you have something great to add, or if you have a story, or just even want to comment, yes, that's great. Please feel free to do so. That's one of the benefits of Zoom, is that it allows us to be very interactive, and all three of us are able to see those comments. On that side as well, we also have the ability to raise your hand, or you have the ability to raise your hand. And so it is an icon that you're going to see. I believe it's on the top of your screens for the attendees. And what I like to use that feature for is if we need to get into some real troubleshooting. So if all of a sudden the connection is bad, if you're finding one of us, we're talking too fast or too slow, or our volume is too low, please feel free to click the raise hand button. And that's just a flag for us to kind of stop, regroup, and figure out what we can do to make this webinar a lot more successful. If you need to know, or you have questions about where those icons are, if you need support, please feel free to message me, and I'll be more than happy to help support you through this, because again, I know that this is a new technology for a lot of people. Last but not least is how to get more support. So as we're going through this webinar, I know there's going to be a lot of questions. Openness is a very complex subject. All three of us have lived. We know openness. We know how complex it can be. And we understand that there can be need for support. A webinar is just a part of the conversation. So if you are finding that after this webinar you do have more questions, you want to get more support, please do feel free to reach out to us, whether it's MaryJo and some of her services that she provides, or through us at Adopt4Life as well. We're more than happy to help support you. And just know that the dialogue isn't ending here. So, did anybody have any questions about some of the housekeeping items before we get going into the sort of meat and potatoes of the content? Just gonna wait to see if anyone is responding. I don't see anyone. So yes, your microphones are muted, so you don't need to worry about any background noise. Okay, that being said, oh, there's one chat. What is the difference between the chat box and the Q&A box? So that's a good question. So for this webinar, we tend to, because it's a bit more informal, we're going to be using just the chat box. The question and answer box are really questions that you might have. Different types of webinars that are a bit more formal, you're able to use the chat to mingle with each other, and the question and answer box really to have specific questions. But I find that using the chat box is a bit more interactive, and it can bring in everybody into the conversation. So if you use the question and answer box, absolutely feel free to use it. But I personally just prefer the chat, because it gets everybody involved. The next question we have, so someone does not see a way of asking questions anonymously. So at the bottom of the screen, you should see a 2 and a drop down, and that's where you'll be able to see all panelists or the hosts. So the hosts are Joy, myself, and MaryJo. So you'll be able to scroll that. If you do not see that, please feel free to use the question and answer text, because that will just go to us as panelists, or sorry, as the hosts. And will there be questions and answers at the end? We're hoping so. Because this is interactive, please feel free to ask your questions as we go, as the questions spark up. That being said, we are hoping to leave time at the end specifically for different questions. As well, if you're finding that there's something that wasn't addressed in this webinar, that's when we can absolutely get the support afterwards as well. So I hope that answers questions. Okay, there's the panelist option and the attendee option, yes. There is a panelist option in the attendee. So the panelist would be the 3 of us, and the attendee is everybody who's coming. So yes, you're right, Caitlin, sorry, thank you for that. The panelist option is how you'll be able to ask us a question. Okay, so that being said, we're gonna get going. There we go, MaryJo, this is you.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me? Okay, great.
Yes.
So, hi, I'm MaryJo, and I'm a registered psychotherapist. I have a private practice that specializes in attachment and adoption and trauma in children, and I work mostly with adoptive families. And I work sometime. Part of my life is also spent working with refugees and trauma in refugee children. So um, it's kind of all about trauma and developmental trauma. Um, and I live a couple of hours north of Toronto, but I have a pretty wide area that I serve folks who are adopted. And I am an adoptive parent, and we have openness with our daughter's family.
Okay, so I can summarize a little bit about myself there. You can see there, my husband and I adopted a sibling group of 3 in 2011, so going on 7 years ago. So we have been living that experience, and professionally my background is occupational therapy, and the majority of my career was spent in adolescent mental health practice and working with the youth in the community as well since that time. And in parent support, a lot of the families I've supported in the London area, I've been involved in providing school support, and I have worked with families around openness planning and that sort of thing as well. We do have openness with actually a lot of openness with our children's foster families, kind of an extended family relationship there, and more recently some openness with some biological members of the kids' families. So that's been kind of an exciting and developing area for us more recently.
Perfect. And my name is Katherine. I do apologize. I am fighting a cold. But hopefully you can all still hear me. I am also a mom of 3 young children through adoption. Our older 2 came to us as a sibling group in 2013, and they were ages 3.5 and 15 months. Our oldest daughter, who's now 7, I can't believe 7, we have an openness order for her, so we do have court-mandated letters and pictures to birth mom. Our son, although they are full biological siblings, is a closed adoption, although we also still have openness that way. And about 2.5 years after they came home, about 2.5 years when they came home, we adopted our youngest daughter at birth, and we have an openness agreement with her. So I sort of have all 3 levels of openness. I do also have experience supporting other families through that, in supporting going through mediation and finding what openness looks like for each family is obviously very different. Background-wise, I am a social worker, and I have a background in special needs, as well as both lived and work experience in supporting children with complex medical needs. So that's me in a nutshell.
Okay, so we're providing a little bit of an outline up front so you know what to expect as we go through the presentation. So if there are particular topics or areas that you're really looking forward to discussing and learning more about tonight, you may see it there, and certainly if not, you're always welcome to ask additional questions. So we're going to begin by trying to define openness a little bit and talk about a spectrum basically of openness, and those will be our next couple of slides, and then we'll be moving into talking about who might be part of openness for your child and your family. And the child's circle, and of course talking about why would we look at openness and why would that be important. We'll talk about the benefits of it, and also spend, I think, probably a fair bit of time talking about some of the complexities of openness in all of its different manifestations. In talking about complexities, I think it's really important to talk as well about our own feelings as the parents who are raising our children and helping them navigate openness and helping facilitate for that for them. So we'll be spending a bit of time on that, and then moving into some discussion around some of the practicalities of planning for openness and what that might look like, followed by some discussion time and questions, hopefully. And again, we can address some questions as we go through the presentation as well.
So one of the things that we want to think about is that openness is really a spectrum. And so openness can be really, really, really limited to some repository of documents where documents get exchanged, like a letter once a year. Sometimes it's pictures being through a third party. It might be a social worker, or it might be the Children's Aid Society, where the pictures are exchanged once a year or offered to the family of origin. That spectrum can go right from that limited right through to something that is face-to-face visits that are frequent. Basically the family of origin becomes an extended family members of the adoptive family. So we have to think about openness as being a spectrum. And the other thing that we need to think about too is that where openness is on that spectrum is probably pretty fluid. And it's fluid according to lots of different things, but we don't need to think of it as being stuck at one place on that spectrum over time. Do you want to go to there we go. And so there's a couple of other, there's another aspect that we want to think about, and this is called the Openness Grid, and it's from Laurie Holden and a presentation that she made a while ago. And so this Openness Grid is about thinking about two variables of openness, and one is what we just talked about on the spectrums. That's kind of the degree of contact. But the other really important part about this thinking about openness is not the degree of contact, because that's really something quite concrete, but we also need to think about the degree of open-heartedness. So in fact, you could have a lot of open-heartedness about your child's family of origin and the part of the adoption constellation that belongs to the child's family of origin, and the child's past. So that could be teachers, it could be all kinds of different people from the child's life before they joined your family, and so. But there may actually be no contact whatsoever. However, there might be pictures in your home of the family of origin. There may be conversations happening on a regular basis about the child's family of origin. And there may be information that you're getting about the family of origin that you're able to pass on in terms of well-being or different aspects of their life. And so this degree of open-heartedness is really, it's about how well you include in your child's day-to-day life, almost, that sense of the continuity of their life, the continuity of the people, the continuity and the importance of the people who have been in their life before the child was a member of your family. So thinking about openness as being two factors. It's about open-heartedness, and it's about the degree of contact. And both of those things are a spectrum, and both of those things may change over time, depending on various factors. But we'd really like to achieve open-heartedness and to maintain a fairly high degree of open-heartedness.
Okay. So thinking about that spectrum and that grid, and thinking a little bit more about what is openness and who might be participating in it. You can see from the grid and the spectrum that openness really, it's not always about direct contact, as was mentioned. But in its broadest sense, I think about building and maintaining those relationships or cultural and community connections that are important to a child. On our the Adopt4Life blog, our November campaign was on openness, and I went there today, was kind of reviewing some of the blog posts, and there was a quote that stood out that was sent in by a parent who's involved in the Adopt4Life community. It said, "Openness fosters connection for our children. It offers them a sense of belonging that allows them to understand their roots." And I think that really nicely kind of sums up the way that I think about openness as well. So we've got all kinds of people who may be part of our children's circle, and sometimes, I mean, there are a lot of reasons why it may be more difficult or may not be the right time or may not be possible to have direct contact, certainly thinking about some of the complexities of international adoption, but even locally in public and private adoption, there are different factors that come into play in terms of who you may be able to have openness with or how you honor a spirit of openness for your child. So some of the people that you may be thinking about could be kin, that could be biological relatives of the child. It could be Heath, who would fall into that kinship relationship, who would be people who are part of your child's community, who mean something to them, teachers or coaches or that kind of thing. Foster families certainly can be an important part of openness. Other members of the adoptive family. Siblings are really important to think about too. Siblings obviously are not always living together in situations where there's been adoption, and different siblings, as in, I think Katherine's situation would be an example where, you know, with a combination of openness agreements and orders and contact with some people and not having contact with other people, that can add some complexities and be something to think about in terms of how to facilitate openness within your family. The birth of new siblings again adds extra layers, and whether those siblings are going to be raised by members of the biological family, and you know, will that open up some doors for contact there, or whether those new siblings may be fostered or adopted by other families, and your openness circle may continue expanding that way as well. We'll talk later in the presentation about sort of the range of formality in terms of openness. I know in our situation, there is no formal structure around that. We don't have any openness agreements or orders in place. We happen to be able to develop some really effective working relationships with the children's foster families. And as I said in the introduction, we really consider them part of our extended family network now, and have just been able to negotiate and work out that relationship in ways that mutually work for everybody, and that our kids enjoy and value. But again, on the other end of that spectrum are highly structured agreements that lay out very specific terms of what openness would look like. So we will be talking a little bit more about that as we go on. But yeah, when we're thinking about that openness, we're thinking about all of those components, people, relationships, communities, and culture that may make up openness for your child.
Just unmute myself here. So there definitely are benefits to openness. There definitely are complexities, and we are going to be spending a length of time talking about the complexities. But I think it is important to talk about the benefits of it. Obviously, having a sense of openness, and again, I have personal experience in all areas of openness. It really does give those missing pieces to the child's story and the child's history. A story that I actually want to share about this and about how openness can look like is our son, as I mentioned, is a closed adoption. And he is 5 now and has started asking questions about who he looks like. And because we have a closed adoption, at the time we had a closed adoption, we didn't have any pictures to share. That wasn't shared with us through his adoption or his older sister's adoption. So we really weren't able to tell him, who does he look like, what's his eyes, what's his background. And so we as a family made the decision to do DNA testing. And that DNA testing actually told us that our children are part Icelandic, which was news to us. And so, like any other person, I Googled Iceland to figure out, well, what does that mean to be Iceland? And this memory is engraved in my mind because I was sitting with my son, my 5-year-old son, Googling Iceland, clicking on Google Images, and up pops up Icelandic people who are Icelandic. And my son turns to me and says, "Oh, that's where I get my eyes from." And it was really that connection in his mind of saying, although at that point in time, we did not have any type of connection or any sort of openness with his birth family, he was able to share in his background and his culture. And so we have started to try and make Icelandic foods, which turned out absolutely horrible, which is a new memory in itself that we have as a family, because I don't know how to cook. But that just really is another way that openness can work for some families, because we appreciate that could be some safety issues involved. That being said, medical backgrounds are very important. A lot of our children can have a lot of blanks when it comes to their medical background, and having that level of openness, whether it's letters, phone calls, personal contact, it really gives us a chance to understand that background. As well as an adoptive parent, it's giving us that knowledge and acceptance and compassion. And I will be very honest that it is hard. Especially if children are coming from foster care, they were apprehended for trauma or prenatal exposure. It's hard not to let your own biases and judgment get in the way. I will be very first to admit that it did in my case, but as we got to know their birth family, my own biases vanished and we developed a great relationship. So it helped me as an adoptive parent to help understand a bit more about the family's background, and in turn that strengthened my relationship with my own children. Cultural connections, I think my Icelandic fish story is a good representation about how it's really great to be able to support our children's cultural connections and really help them with that self-identity piece, which is major, as well as be able to support our kids in their own personal circle. So when we talk about family in our household, family just isn't mom, dad, brothers, sisters, but it's also birth family, and it's also, like Joy had said, foster family. And so we really talk about the benefits and the strengths, and it really does take a village to raise a child, and we know who our children's village are. And although our own openness may not always be face-to-face communications, it still allows our children to ask those questions and get a sense of truly who they are. Over time as well, the more open we are to openness, we're able to help get a plan in place, prepare and respond to certain things. So again, with an openness order, it's a bit more prescribed. In our case, it's 4 letters that we send a year to a specific address, and we rent a PO box that birth family is able then to send to us. That's how we are planning as far as safety. That being said, we're also aware that as our children get older, and in the day and age of social media, having that sort of control isn't always an option, especially with adult adoptees. And I know MaryJo is going to talk a little bit more about that later on, about how supporting our children and preparing them now is going to help them as they get older and start asking more tough questions and making those decisions on their own. Obviously, again, having children see us as collaborating and as supporting this connection, as opposed to seeing us as the hindrance, is going to be not only great for our own relationship with them, but again, it goes back to their sense of identity, sense of belonging and understanding. And there's always different ways to be creative. So I gave the suggestion, or they gave the example of us using a PO box. Our children also write letters and pictures. We can send videos, so we don't actually have that face-to-face contact, but there's still a way of us being able to connect with one another. And there's absolutely, the creativity that we can use is endless. And it's great to have the children involved with that, whether it's they're older or younger, to some extent too, because kids are very creative and they'll be able to get a sense of what makes them feel more comfortable as you're developing that sense of openness. So I don't know if anybody else has anything else to add about the benefit. No.
No, I think that's good.
Good. Just a general overview, obviously. I can tell you more stories about my family, but
Yeah.
there's definitely have been some great benefits to openness.
I might mention, sorry, it's coming to mind quickly. One thing that's been interesting in our family is our boys were old enough when they joined our family to remember their foster families. They were just about 3 and 4. Our daughter was 1 and doesn't have clear memories of her first year particularly, but in her case, it's almost been, I mean, all of our kids find that those relationships really important, but it's been really interesting for me how important it has been for our daughter to know her foster parents, the home that she lived in, to be able to go back and visit that home and to visit her bedroom and to know what her environment looked like during that first year, and to be able to go back and ask questions of the people who parented her during that time. So that's just one thing when I think about the benefits of openness. I think I've had people, I think I wrote in my blog post for the November campaign that, sometimes people will assume that because the child was young when they joined the family, that maybe that's not as big of a piece or as important of a piece, but I can definitely say in our case that that's been extremely important, and every child is going to have different needs around openness at different ages, but just because they were very young and don't remember doesn't mean that's not going to be important, and in fact that may actually be quite a key piece of building their identity.
Absolutely. So on to the complexities.
Okay, and that's me. So when we're talking about adoption in general, adoption comes always for every child with a series of losses, and really, no matter how you define it, they're experiencing losses. They are placed in a family where they are likely not living with either one of their biological parents. And so, and if they were, there likely wouldn't be an adoption. But it was so that always comes with losses, and it comes with losses of the people who are really the people that you, as a child, shouldn't lose. I mean, those are really significant losses, to lose your biological parents. And so over the course of adoption, which is about gaining, there's the gaining part of adoption, but what we're really trying to do is we're trying to minimize those losses, and we're trying to maximize and maintain connections. So if we think about openness as serving that purpose of minimizing the child's losses and maximizing their ability to have good connection with their whole story, then that's really the goal of openness. And so, and we know now really that because of social media, most children will start to try to find their families of origin and people that they were connected to with or without permission. And so that's what we mean by when we're saying it's a matter of when, not if. And many, not so much now, because openness is becoming much more common, but I think in adoptions that are more than a couple of years old, it was much more likely to be assumed to be closed. And so, I'm finding that there are many adoptions that are 10 years old or 12 years old, and the parents are calling me because they have been in a closed adoption, and yet they've discovered that their children are in contact with their birth families through social media, and it's frightening to them. And so this is a situation that really is best avoided, because really what can happen there is your child is developing a relationship with this other person, and your child has felt like they're not supposed to do that, so they're now keeping it a secret from you, and really that can be quite an unhealthy situation. So really you want to try to avoid any kind of secrecy, and the best way to avoid secrecy, of course, is to have an open kind of dialogue about it. And the other thing that we need to think about is that at any given stage of the adoption process, or the kind of the lifeline of the life timeline of the adoption, the child and the others in that circle with whom you may be wanting openness or needing openness, the level of readiness for each one of those people is going to vary over time. So if we were thinking about, if a parent is incarcerated, if a parent is mentally unwell, if a parent has addictions issues, then those would be reasons why you may not have any openness with that particular parent. And yet 5 years down the road, those issues could be resolved, and the parent is no longer incarcerated and has a steady employment and is doing really well, and that part of their life is behind them. Mental health issues have been resolved, well medicated, steadily employed, consistent housing, and doing really well because mental health can be treated, or mental illness can be treated. And you may find, addictions have been resolved, and the person has established safety and stability in their life. So, and yet again, those things can fall by the wayside too. And so birth parents may go through periods of safety and stability, and then periods where they're not. And the same thing goes with siblings. There may be siblings who are experiencing struggles in their families and dealing with their own issues, and may not at this time be able to engage in face-to-face visits. And so they may get put on hold for a while. So that's what I mean by the openness grid, remaining open-hearted about that connection, and yet the degree of contact may slide back and forth on that spectrum over the course of years. And then, of course, your child will become an adult, and then you have nothing to say about who they're meeting with or talking with or establishing relationships with. And so really thinking about, when your child is an adult, what you hope for them is that however they manage their relationships with the people in their lives, and right now we're talking about members of their family of origin, that they know that you as their adoptive parent is there for them and to help them and to be available to guide and advise and support. And if you don't have open-heartedness, then it's possible that your child would choose not to use your guidance and your support, and to do that without you being there as a backup for them, in case it doesn't go well. And so really open-heartedness is so important to how your child interacts with you, with their family of origin, in a kind of a lifelong kind of way. Especially in transcultural or transracial adoptions, identity becomes more and more poignant as a child grows and understands that there is something else that is not part of their current family, but something else that's part of them and part of their other family. And so that open-heartedness means that you're supporting that exploration of that identity, and yet you're helping your child to understand, about safe boundaries and ways of interacting with members of their birth family that is safe and healthy. And so the child starts to, especially as the older they get, that sense of identity of belonging to two families, that sense of identity in perhaps two cultures or two races. I know certainly that my daughter, who's of Nigerian heritage, she was certainly, in her family of origin and in foster care. We're in families where she was with people who looked like her. And as she was adopted, she came into a family where everyone was white. And so she was different, and that visual difference was always there, and it was always perceived by the community. We had to make it very clear with our words and our body language in the community that this person who doesn't look like us, in fact, belongs with us. And whether that was with airport security, we had lots of struggles around airport security, that they would sort of try to step in and divide us and prevent her from coming with us when we were going places. So we had to really work at helping her to do that. And as she has other experiences with her siblings who do look like her, it helps her to understand the two places where she belongs, the two families where she belongs. There are difficulties around closed adoptions. Certainly, I've experienced in my work families working with children whose adoptions are 100% completely closed. And so I find that for those children, it feels like a shame. It feels like that they are a secret, or so unworthy of being acknowledged. That they turn it around, that it's about them, especially younger children. So I think that when adoptions are closed for safety reasons, we really have to help children understand about why it is a closed adoption and why there is no information. And that can take a lot of work, and there will be different developmental stages where children will go through the need to know more. And usually that's around 6, 7, 8, where they really understand that I do have a biological family somewhere else, because I didn't, I know how babies are born, and you adoptive parents didn't do that, and so two other people did, and I need to know why and what happened. And then through the teenage years, around the creation of their through individuation and through their identity formation, it's a lot tougher. And so one of the things that I think is difficult is knowing when to provide information to your child about their families of origin and the reasons why they were adopted. I think the simplest solution for all is that it's always information that is shared, and there never was a time when it wasn't shared. That's kind of the simplest way to go, because as time passes and children and information is withheld, then you start wondering, well, when do I tell them? And then you wonder, and the next thing you know, the child's 8 or 9, and there's information that they're asking about. And when you tell them, they'll say, but why haven't you told me this yet? Like, you knew, but you didn't tell me. So there's a risk of the child feeling like you've hidden things, or there's been secrets. And then, of course, hiding things and having secrets, may undermine trust. We don't want to do that. So in general, we want to provide children with their stories in age-appropriate ways. We want to let them know as much information as developmentally is appropriate for them, and as they developmentally, and as they age and developmentally mature, then we're providing them with more details that are developmentally appropriate. What did we want to say about the last two subjects there, ladies? I'm drawing a blank.
I think you kind of included everything that you were talking about, just really the complexity of starting to build that relationship with birth families, and that, like you said, it can ebb and flow as far as a level of readiness, and so there is complexities with that. And obviously, as far as a child's fear of rejection is also something to come into play, so just knowing to support them. And again, that comes with being able to talk about the levels of readiness of both the circles, but also the child themselves, and to make sure that you're having that dialogue and that the child's prepared and ready themselves. I think that was about. I don't know, Joy, if you have anything else.
Well, there was a couple of other things that I do remember. If I'm reading my notes here,
we have another slide as well.
Okay, but there's the new siblings. So sometimes when children are apprehended and then go through the process and then they're adopted, that the family of origin, the birth mother, birth father, continue to have children. And then, in fact, because their lives haven't changed and improved, they may retain custody of those children. So there's always this, or they may lose custody of those children, but then they are placed in different adoptive or foster homes. And so how one works out how to have openness with siblings who may have contact with birth family or who may reside with birth family, and of course that situation where you're openness with a sibling but not with birth parents would be very, very complex. And so there are certainly different ways to manage it, and safe ways to manage it. But again, I think every single family is really, really different, and every single family today is going to be very, very different than that family in 2 or 3 or 5 or 7 years. So that's why it's really complex.
Absolutely. Joy, do you have anything else to add before we go to the other slide?
I don't think so. I think around fear of rejection, I'll probably talk about that more when we talk about managing our own feelings, because I think that can also refer to the adoptive parents and some of their concerns about what happens if we have all this openness with first families, and what happens to my role in the child's life as well, and what decisions will the child make in the future around that too.
Absolutely. Oh, sorry. There we go. So I think that is still you, MaryJo.
Oh, sorry. Thinking about safety around social media, I think it's important that it's important to monitor that, knowing that children will look for their families of origin or other people in their lives, and the more open-heartedness and good communication you have with your child, that's how you're going to maintain safety. Looking at the different levels of contact. I think Katherine's mentioned this really great idea of having a post office box. That is one way of maintaining safety, and also knowing that where you meet is hugely important in terms of what feels safe to a child, and yet how do you manage memories? So sometimes the place will either elicit good memories or maybe not so good memories. And I think it's really, really important to think about where it is that either siblings or extended family members are meeting, and how you're doing that. The one thing that I learned fairly recently, and there may be others who know a little bit more about this, but one situation that I had recently taught me that crown wardships and crown wardship orders end when the child is adopted. So when a child is made a crown ward, in the past it was usual to have the phrase crown wardship no access was very, very common. And what I'm finding now is that crown wardship with no comment on access is much more common than it used to be. And so when it says no crown wardship no access, once the adoption order is completed, that crownship order no access, crown wardship no access order is terminated. And so the adoptive parents are then free, legally free, to have the openness that they wish to have. And it's up to the adoptive parents, it's their responsibility and their authority to have the openness that their child, that is right for their child. And that you are neither protected nor limited by that crown wardship order. So lots of people like I said, I didn't know that. So that's something to think about. And if you're in that kind of that process or in that category, it might be a good conversation to have with your adoption worker.
Yeah, we have lived experience with that. So like I had mentioned, our son was Crown Ward no access. He closed adoption is what it was called. And we found that since we had an order for his older sister, not having access for him was, we couldn't do that. We couldn't allow one access to one sibling and not, and so we actually had to then start to navigate what openness would look like for him, although it is considered a closed adoption. Fast forward 4.5 years, we now have contact with biological family, and we send the pictures and letters, and we exchange gifts. Again, because there's a safety aspect, we do it through the PO box, but our sons, when we first thought closed adoption meant no contact, that very much is not the case. So.
And I think timing is everything. We're just referring to developmentally. It's important to know what your child needs, and also to be aware that disclosure of information needs to be developmentally appropriate. So too much, too little, it's tricky. It's complex.
Absolutely. And we do have an attendee who also said that they also have a closed adoption, and they're pursuing increasing openness, and that their children's aid have been helping to support you with this, which is amazing to hear, because it can be scary. It's different, especially if you're in the mindset like we were, thinking that closed adoption meant no access at all. That's not the case. So I'm really glad to hear that you're getting support with your local children's aid as well. So just before we switch gears a little bit, I know there was a lot of information thrown out about complexities. So I just, if you guys are okay, MaryJo and Joy, if you guys are good with it, maybe just see if there are any questions about what we've talked about before we kind of move on, just as everything's sort of fresh in your minds. I don't know if anybody has any comments or questions about the complexities at all. Okay, I'm not seeing any, so feel free, if you're a slow typer or if I'm going too fast, please feel free to add into the conversation as we keep going.
Okay, so I will chat about our feelings as parents here for a few minutes. We're going to have feelings about openness, and that could run the whole gamut of every emotion and feeling that we could probably think of. And I think we just need to admit that we're going to have feelings, and many of them may be mixed feelings, or some of them may be difficult feelings for us to acknowledge and work through. But once we admit that we have those feelings, then we can recognize how they're impacting the experience and decide what we may need to do about that. I think the first thing to keep in mind that, we are facilitators of our child's story when they're at ages where they don't have the freedom or the knowledge to pursue openness, or where we need to be taking a lead in helping to make wise and careful choices around that. We need to honor that this is our child's life, and that this is their story, and regardless of how we feel about it, we need to acknowledge that and integrate that understanding into our parenting and how we participate in openness with our children and facilitate that. So the feelings that we have, I think, again, they can be so complex that sometimes we may not even fully understand what it is we're feeling, and we really need to pause and take time to actually work through some of that. We may readily recognize and acknowledge some of the feelings that we're having and be able to accept that easily, and other feelings may surprise us or bother us in some way. And our feelings about openness may really be different for different members of our child's circle as well, or in different circumstances and at different stages of our child's development or over time. I think highlighting both, some of the pleasant and the feel-good emotions, we may feel thankful. I know that for me, I am extremely thankful when I watch how my kids respond to their first foster families and those first homes that they grew up in and the people that were raising them during that time. I am really thankful that they have the opportunity to maintain those relationships. And that's an ongoing part of their lives. I'm really thankful that the people in their lives for those first years are people that are great examples for them. And so I have a lot of positive feelings about that. We may have curiosity. We may want to know more about our child's roots and background, or we may not. Some of the challenging feelings that we could have certainly could range from sadness for our child, for the losses they've experienced, and even some sadness for their first families as well, and other people who've experienced loss in that process. Perhaps even our own losses and integrating kind of what all that means for us. Certainly there can be confusion or feelings of apprehension. I think fear might be a big one as well. Confusion and sometimes feeling overwhelmed or stress around kind of how to work this all out in a way that is safe and healthy for everybody involved. I think there's a potential for jealousy as well when we're trying to figure out our role as a parent in our child's lives, but also accepting the fact that we're not the only parent in our child's lives. And coming to terms with that and figuring out how to accept that in moving forward. We might have, again, feelings about practical issues, safety issues, the impact that openness could have on your lifestyle, particularly if that involves actual time spent for visits or remembering to schedule times to put together packages and those kinds of things. We could have feelings about the future and what is this going to look like for our child and our family over time. We may have feelings about the nature and the strength of the relationship with our child to move through openness and still feel secure in the fact that you can maintain a strong relationship with your child through that. Your child's ability to cope and integrate all of these relationships may be something that you have feelings about or mixed feelings about at times as well. Why is it important to be able to recognize and manage our feelings? I mean, there are lots of reasons for that, which I think we've started to touch on throughout the presentation. But I think one thing, again, to say is that openness, opportunities for openness or connections can occur at any time. And we may or may not be anticipating those things. Certainly in our case, some of the newer openness that we're beginning to navigate has been somewhat unexpected, and some of the potential links to other members of our child's circle is something that we're thinking through, I think, sooner than we anticipated. We knew at some point that some of these connections were definite possibilities over time, but we're facing some of that a little bit earlier than we maybe thought we would, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just, again, takes us back to those complexities in terms of thinking through how do we navigate that, and then, again, being attentive to how do we feel about that, and how are we going to address that as a family. But that, again, realizing that is one reason to really identify, early on, how do I feel about this whole concept of openness, and how is that impacting my response to the situation. If we delay openness because our feelings are sort of unresolved, or we have some things to work through, I think, we sometimes could miss opportunities. And again, in one particular situation with our children, there's again another event that's occurred where we realize, okay, there's a door closed on future openness, and that's no longer a possibility. And that raises some feelings as well. So again, that openness, that opportunity may not always be there. And if we're able to work through some of our feelings on some of these issues sooner rather than later, it may mean that we have some good opportunities and our child has some opportunities for openness that might not otherwise be possible. I think feelings are complicated too. Sometimes feelings they're legitimate and we need to validate them. Sometimes our fear, for instance, there may be good reasons for that. And so trying to differentiate, when do I pay attention to the feeling that I'm having and actually honor that feeling and act accordingly? And at other times realize, oh, no, you know what, this is a feeling that's my issue and I need to resolve that so that it doesn't interfere with my decision making. So when to listen to our feelings and try to overcome them or work through them. As well, in order to validate and support our children and their experiences and their feelings, we need to have really good awareness of our own feelings and where they kind of fall in this whole situation. If I've got unresolved or really complex feelings that I haven't been able to manage, I'm not going to be as effective in helping my child manage their own feelings or being ready to respond to my child's needs and their feelings, or work with other members of that openness circle as effectively as well. Again, I think that kind of leads into my next point around being able to keep your child's best interests at heart and to figure out whether your feelings are in any way impacting your ability to really think about what's best for your child at this point in time. And so again, just putting our feelings in perspective and not giving them undue influence over our decision making, while also, though, acknowledging that our feelings are valid. We have them, they are real, they are what they are, and being able to also accept where we are at a certain point in time and then figure out where to go from there. Recognizing as well that our children do sense, they pick up, so on our feelings, and they interpret that in some way, and we may not always know the impact that's having on our child, depending on the way that our child communicates to us or the nature of our relationship. So again, being mindful that we don't want to be adding more stress or confusion or shame for our children by having unresolved feelings of our own that are impacting those dynamics. So what do we do about all that? Certainly, some of those feelings may be things we can kind of work through on our own or with our immediate family, but there are going to be other times where we may want to hear an outside perspective, be able to kind of express those feelings to somebody else, and have someone who's outside of our situation be able to kind of look at that and help us work through that, whether that's going to a therapist, someone like MaryJo, whether that's connecting with peer support like through Adopt4Life, and there are lots of other great places and people where you can go and access support as well, to help you kind of work through some of that and figure out, okay, now how do I approach openness and manage my feelings at the same time? Considering strategies and planning, again, there are formal processes like mediation as well. We can work with our workers or find someone to work with around preparing some kind of openness agreement and putting some structure in place that might put good boundaries around openness or might allow us to work through those issues with someone else's help. And as well, acknowledging, again, some of those things that may be very legit. So open-heartedness, where we may not always be able to measure openness in terms of contact or physical sort of relationships that we have, but what is the attitude that we bring to acknowledging the other people and circumstances in our child's story, and how do we help address our child's story, prepare ourselves and our children for the openness that is either in front of us or that is likely or may occur in the future.
Wonderful. We do have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Yeah, sorry, Joy, you were cutting out a little bit.
Oh dear, okay.
I heard it, so hopefully everyone else was able to hear it as well. But so one of the questions that we have, are there any tips on how to start openness with a bio family that didn't know the child existed? So for example, the bio father's ex-wife. So I don't know if anybody has. That's a big question. Are there any tips on how to start openness with a bio family with the child that didn't know the child exists?
So I guess I would be thinking, first of all, that that person, if she doesn't know that the child exists, then how does the child know that that person exists? And so is there, I don't really understand the need to create that connection, because if that adult doesn't know about the child, then how does the child know about the adult? But anyway, there must be some reason.
Yeah, in this case, they said that person has bio siblings.
Ah, okay. So it's always about the adoptive parent being responsible for the relationship. And so regardless of how that other adult fits into the child's life, the adoptive parent is responsible for creating that relationship and having a relationship first. We don't allow our children to have relationships with strangers. So the adoptive parent needs to have a relationship with that person first, and that then some level of trust needs to be established. And once that level of trust is established between the two adults, then working out, what kind of contact will happen after that, would then involve the child. But I think that adult to adult first communication, that's just that just has to start, and you have to establish a relationship, and after that everything will follow according to the quality of the relationship that has been established.
Yeah, absolutely. And so another question that we received is, do you guys ever feel overwhelmed with the connections, so with foster families and bio families, and how do you manage that? I don't mind answering this one because I have a lot of connections with a lot of people and in varying different degrees. So it can be complex. It can be a bit daunting at times. It can be overwhelming at times. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. As you all know, as adoptive parents and professionals, it's not a fairy tale. How we manage it is we make certain times for it. So we include foster family. We have a great relationship with them. We go for visits, but we also make sure that we have family time as well. So for the 4 letters and pictures a year, they go around holidays, but we don't let that impede our own holidays and our own traditions. With that as well is that the power of openness is in our side as an adoptive parent. So we do get to choose what pictures we share, what letters we share. Same with our children. We ask them if they want to include a picture. Do they feel like doing an art and craft today? So really, it's about finding balance, and you need to learn to put those boundaries up, and you need to learn to know when it is okay to say no and to back off a little bit in those relationships. And that comes in part with building that relationship, like MaryJo was saying, with that person first. So a great example is our youngest child. We have the openness agreement with, so we actually knew her birth parents before she was born. We had an openness agreement of, I think it was emails and picture sharing X amount of times a year, and we'll develop it as it goes. But when birth father called me at 5:30 in the morning on May 25th, I'm trying to remember her birthday, on May 25th, to tell us that birth mom was in labor, that openness agreement, and I actually wrote a blog on this for our openness campaign, that openness agreement just seems so static. It didn't make sense, because we had this person pouring his heart out to us and letting us know that, our daughter, and by our, I mean ours and their daughter, was being born. So for us, it's about developing that relationship with them, understanding that it's not going to be perfect, and putting up those boundaries. So yes, they are included in our holidays. Yes, they're included in all of our celebrations, but so is our family, and we allow our family to have our family time as well. And we have special memories and traditions on top of what we do with our birth families and foster families and kin families and everyone else that's involved. So that's sort of how I've been able to manage it, because it absolutely can be daunting at times. I don't know if anyone else has any other insight.
Well, I'd just like to say that I married a man with 5 siblings. I have 5 children. My adopted daughter has 5 siblings, and now my children are getting married, and the family just keeps growing and growing and growing, and now there's 4 grandchildren, and I kind of love it.
It's awesome. Yeah. It's awesome to share, and I remember, and just going back to the benefits parts of it is it's really, the benefits of it is amazing, and being in a doctor's office with my youngest daughter, and they're saying, oh, is there a history of allergies in the family? Oh, I never knew. Text birth mom, hey, is there an openness? No, we're good. Oh no, we're good. You can give her this medication. You know, those are things that are really beneficial for us. And I think, yeah, it's about developing that relationship and knowing that you're not going to see eye to eye all the time, and knowing that you need to make that balance. But ours is the same way. Our family house, our house on these holidays, like this past Christmas, is a mishmash of everybody who's a part of our lives and a part of our kids' life, and it's loud and chaos, but you know, that's what makes us a family, I guess.
In our case, that's something that I sort of wondered how that would all fit in when we first adopted. Our kids are from quite a long distance away, and actually in some ways, I think that makes the day-to-day piece, it simplifies that. I mean, we can email or have phone contact as we would with any other relative that we hear from occasionally, but that's really the nature of that relationship. And because we don't have any formal structure in place, that just kind of happens as it happens. We do, thankfully as well, we love the area our kids are from, so it's actually kind of a treat for us to be able to, and we love road trips, so that just fits into our family's lifestyle, and we really look forward to that. It does mean that close to a week of our vacation each year, we are making use of that time to go and do those visits, but that's what our kids love to do. It works for us. So at this point in time, that's been something that we've been able to integrate into our lives in a way that feels good for everyone in our family. Certainly I could see those logistics being a little bit different if you're in the same town with people who want to be getting together all the time. And I think that's where, it's totally okay to sit down and kind of work out, what's realistic for us in this situation. And I know there are also situations where it might not really work well or be a great idea to have everybody together at the same birthday parties and events. And that's where it certainly could be more complicated. And there are a lot of individual factors that come into play there for sure.
So I hope that answers your question. Clearly it's individualized, so everyone's going to have a different way that it works for them. And I think the most important thing is find a way that works for you and your family and your child, and what you're comfortable with is the most important thing as well. Oh, well, okay. So planning for openness, I feel like we sort of talked about all of this already, but I just we wanted to create a slide just to make sure that we are talking about how the logistics and how openness can actually look. So again, openness orders are legally binding openness that you have with a birth family, with whoever it is that you have this order. It can go through mediation with lawyers. It can go in front of a judge. It just really depends on how it's done. In my case, we did go through mediation. So birth family had a lawyer, our children had a lawyer, and we had one as well. And we were able to negotiate what was in the best interest of the children, but also to maintain safety and to ensure that everybody was comfortable. So because of that, we are mandated to keep that openness. And if we choose, or if we're not able to maintain that openness for any reason, we do have to go back to the courts and change and amend. So for those of you who might be going into an openness order situation, or are just starting the process, although it can look very scary as someone who's been through it. It can be a very scary process to go through, but it really isn't as scary as it may seem, and it is something that can be amended later on if circumstances change as well. So you don't need to worry about it being permanent. Hopefully it is something that you will maintain, and if anything, you can actually develop the relationship even more, which is what we're doing in our case. So it's something that can grow as you do. The openness agreements are written contracts that are not legally binding. So basically, in my experience, the agreement is something that's written between both parties, both the birth family and the adoptive family, and it's both of you sitting together to come up with some more verbal agreement of what openness will look like. I shared the story with my youngest daughter's birth family that we had this beautiful agreement made, and we made our own private emails, and we were going to email once a month, and then he called me, and we threw it out the window. And we have a great relationship. We go to dinners and baseball games together, and they're raising their 3 older children, and we're all great friends. So an openness agreement isn't anything legal, and it's something, again, that changes as you develop that relationship with your family. And negotiating openness is a huge part of it. So we've talked about this throughout the entire webinar, that as your relationship grows and develops, so is your level of openness. So it is not stagnant. It isn't something that stays still. It's a working, living, breathing document. It's a working, living, breathing relationship. And it's something that ebbs and flows and will continue to ebb and flow throughout the entire, through your child's entire life. How to start and begin this relationship is really going to depend on the circumstances of who the child is, the circumstances of how the child was adopted, as well as your own comfort level. So MaryJo had a really great point in saying that having that relationship between the parents, birth family, and adoptive parents is imperative, and is very important in order to then start building that relationship with the children as well. Especially in circumstances where there are siblings involved as well. It's just really important to have that, to develop that relationship, but also to develop those potential boundaries. And so an example of this, I go back to my youngest daughter. We have very different parenting skills. We have very different parenting ideologies. And so we do butt heads in some ways between our child rearing ways and Abigail, our daughter's birth family child rearing ways. So it's just about being open and honest in developing the relationship and trust enough to say, this is how we're deciding, this is why we're deciding, but also being able to understand and have empathy towards other people. It's not going to always be a beautiful, loving relationship in all cases. There can be ebbs and flows, just like any relationship with anyone. You have your own siblings, your own parents. So it's really about being open and honest. And again, going back to that open-heartedness. And if you're finding that you're having a really difficult time and not sure on how to develop that relationship, or you find your own feelings are getting in the way, that's when we would be suggesting to make sure that you're reaching out for that support. And just know that you aren't in this alone. And as someone who has gone to mediation with lawyers, with birth family, it is scary, it is intimidating, but you don't need to do it alone. And all the feelings that you might be having about openness, whether it's apprehension to excitement, to all of them together, those are very normal feelings. So it's really important to know that there's people out here who've also gone through it, and that you can lean on for support. So we do have a question. What types of safety issues are ones that we should be particularly aware of in starting a new relationship? That's a really good question. I can talk about in my particular situation, those safety issues were actually identified with our children's aid. So they were adopted through foster care, and our worker was able to be very honest with us about past histories of the birth family and past relationships, as well as potential safety concerns with their foster family. So because we knew that there was that potential warning signs, it gave us a really good indication that we should also be careful in starting that relationship. I don't know if Joy or MaryJo, you have any other input about potential safety issues that we should sort of be aware of.
So I think it's all
one thing.
Go ahead, Joy.
That's okay. I was going to say one thing that comes to mind too is thinking beyond just the person you're considering openness with and their extended circle. I know, just speaking generally in our case, there are some more immediate folks that we would be fairly comfortable in certain circumstances having some openness with, but we need to be cautious about sort of the people they're connected to and what some of the implications could be if those people knew where our kids were and those kinds of things. So it's thinking kind of beyond sort of just the immediate person in front of you. And I guess safety really broadly, or maybe it's not safety particularly, but also thinking about, what kind of boundaries do people have? And again, in terms of the level of contact and how much access folks have to your family, is that something that's going to be sustainable and healthy for everyone involved too? So if somebody in the openness circle seems to have some difficulty maintaining boundaries, they're calling 10 times a day or showing up on your doorstep unannounced, those kinds of things may not be immediate safety concerns, but I think those are part of those considerations in terms of how do we make sure that the type of openness fits with everybody's ability to manage that in a way that works for everybody.
The other thing I'd like to say is, we've dealt with lots of safety issues, and they're ongoing. So there's relationships with some members of the family, and some we actually require police protection. So it's about knowing, and it's about using, knowing that information is so widely available. It is so easy to find people because most people have an internet presence, and you can find out people's phone numbers or email addresses. You can have someone, a third party, call and pretend to be somebody else. It's just so easy to find people. So I think the thing is that it's about relationships, and it's always about, just about everything's always all about relationships. I think I've just I'll probably write that on my tombstone. It's all about relationships. So it's about having a relationship to say, no, this is the limit, and you need to follow that limit. And if it's a safety concern, if you don't follow that limit, then I'll need to call the police. So there's that kind of level. But there's, and that's pretty clear when that is, and you need to use the police. But there are other things that make it unsafe that have nothing to do with that. And I think that's things like birth parents referring to themselves as mommy and daddy, and referring to adoptive parents by their first names or their last name, Mr. or Mrs., and not understanding how confusing that can be to a child of any age, really, and how that does not acknowledge the change in parental status. Okay, so they do not have parental authority, and if you are asking them not to do that, and they're not following your request, to me that's a safety issue. That the birth parents are not acknowledging your authority as the child's emotional, psychological, and legal parent. And I think that if you are seeing at any time that the family of origin or a member of the family of origin is not acknowledging your parental authority, and your role as the psychological parent, then that's a psychological red flag. And that would be something that you would need to address very carefully and openly, obviously not in the presence of the child, and set very clear limits. And if those limits are not followed, then you need to perhaps have openness in a different way.
Yeah, that's true. I think another thing too that comes to mind is just you know, in terms of children having contact or any unsupervised contact with folks too, you know, even people who are well-intentioned, are they able to use good judgment, or, you know, what may your children be exposed to even inadvertently? And those kinds of things too can become safety issues, even if there's not sort of specifically a physical safety risk or concern as well. So just kind of, yeah, again, the level of freedom and exposure your child has to different people and making those kind of judgment calls.
Absolutely. So just the last point now, who can help? Obviously, if you are looking for that more peer-to-peer level, again, Adopt4Life, we're here for you. And we can help support you through that. If you're looking for more therapeutic supports, MaryJo and the other attachment therapists and specialists in the field are able to help support you through this and manage your own feelings, manage the intricacies and the complexities of openness. And if you are looking for more clinical support or perhaps more legal advice on that end as well, those are something that we can help refer you to. So please feel free to reach out to us if you are looking for a bit more of that professional side as well. So that is it for our main presentation. We're doing great for time, so I don't know, which is amazing because we usually go over, so exciting. Are there any other questions? Does anybody have any last minute questions before we sort of wrap up? And again, please know, if you do have more of a complex situation or you want an in-depth conversation with someone, please feel free to reach out to Joey, myself, or your parent liaison. Again, MaryJo as well, if you need to have a bit more support that way. Oh, we do have one. Okay, so we do have somebody who said, Biodad gave our soon-to-be adopted child, so fostered from birth for the past 4 years, a birthday card this week which said, "I am your real dad, don't forget." There is no openness order for him, but I agree that there will always be a potential for connection throughout her life. If this happens again, or if BioMom does the same thing, how do we deal with it?
So again, that's about context, and I think that you know, once an adoption is finalized, the CAS wants to acknowledge the authority of the adoptive parent, but when things like that happen out of the blue, what is lacking is context. So, and the main thing that's lacking in that context is the history of a relationship between the adoptive parents and this birth father. And so, without context, that card is not an appropriate thing to share with the child. Yes, you might keep it. You might think about, what do you know about this birth father? What is his current status? Is he doing well in his life? Is having some kind of relationship with this birth father something that you want to initiate? Going back through the CAS and doing it without the ability for someone to find you, like not using your own email or your own, using your own address for a letter, and establishing some line of communication. But you're not going to give your child any gift from anyone with whom you don't have a relationship. And so whether that relationship is simply through communication through letters, but you have to have that relationship context in order to know that this person that you are initiating a relationship with, even if it is just a card, is a person that has a relationship with you that you can trust, to the degree that that relationship is happening, right?
Oh, absolutely. Perfect. So it is now, there is one last question and then we're going to wrap it up. So where are some locations to have face-to-face contact? So for safety reasons, we use email to set up contact so it doesn't happen at our home. Those are good questions. So what for that question, if you wanted to message us afterwards, just even with what your location is, we'll be able to help support. But I do know in some instances, even public locations like parks, meeting halfway, maybe not necessarily in your city, but going to like a McDonald's or places that are a bit more public, that aren't necessarily in the vicinity of your home. I know have worked for some families in the past, as well as there are access centers, but I guess it depends on the situation for your family as well as the location of where you geographically are. So it is something that we can help support you with as well afterwards.
Libraries can have community meeting rooms that you can book.
That's a good suggestion as well. Perfect. Okay, so just being cognizant of time, because I know that we don't want to keep you for too much longer. Thank you, everybody, so very much for joining us. If you do have questions or if you felt like you had a bit more to add, please, again, feel free to connect with us afterwards. If you are viewing this, if you came in a little bit later and you want to watch this over, the email is info@adopt4life.com. It's just at the bottom of your screen there. If you just wanted to send an email to that or to myself personally through Facebook or Joy, we'd be more than happy to send you a copy of this. It is password protected. It's only sent out to specific people, so we know that it's being sent out and there's passwords, so you don't need to worry about your questions being out there or your personal information, again, isn't being shared. So thank you guys very much. We really appreciate taking the time and just continuing this dialogue, and we know that it's not over. So yeah, thank you guys, and thank you, MaryJo, for taking your evening as well as supporting our community, and you are a wealth of knowledge, so it definitely is greatly appreciated.
Oh, it's great to be here. I enjoy doing it.
Perfect. Thank you, Joy, again, for taking your evening out. It's
no problem.
Always great doing webinars with you. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to get going, and do a couple more comments saying thank you. Thank you all guys for being so thoughtful, and your questions have been amazing. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we are done. Have a great evening, everyone.